Call the Halifax Planning Board into session. All members present. On the agenda tonight, we have continuation of Manor Estates, public hearing. Do I have a motion to accept the agenda as read?
I'll make a motion.
Is there a second?
I second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And I'll recuse myself.
Okay. Make a motion to open the public hearing for Amanda's Estates.
I'll second that. Or I'll make the motion if needed.
Do we have a second?
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Very good. And as a quick introduction, our attorney Kessel, is planning on being here this evening. I believe she's arriving at 6:45 or so. So I don't know if everybody's had a chance to see any sort of correspondence that we've had since the last hearing. If you'd like to take a minute just to read through it, just so that we see where we're at right now. Do we have any of the email correspondence that we could provide to the attendees? I think it's part of the public record, right? So I think if you'd like to see it, it's available for everybody.
I don't have copies for everybody. I just have my copy.
I don't know
You
whether
want
we
the
can
newest
make copies since we have 15 minutes.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind making, how many
Yeah,
copies do we need?
Oh, what do you need copies?
Let me just have,
Apparently there's some
I'm just gonna
additional
have Charlie,
communication.
Hi, how are you? Do you want me to give all the email correspondence to everybody?
Well,
I didn't-
if they're going to be looking at it, everybody should get it. So we're happy to make copies.
Okay, it's gonna take me a little while, because I quite a bit.
So just need to print it out and then I can make copies or what?
I think it was really just that the last email has the chain in it, so whatever input Attorney Kessel provided, I think would be captured in the latest email she had.
It looks like it could all be summed up in this one page.
Charlie?
I don't know if you guys want to double check, but I think, Charlie, I think that sums up everything.
I think there may have been correspondence after that.
It's just kind of back and forth with the dates. I can give you the whole thing if you'd like, just to keep
I
it
think also
complete.
Amy put out a couple more questions after that.
There hasn't been any answers.
No, I understand there's not been any answers, but there's no put everything together.
I don't know how many copies will have. You know, how many-
36.
Do you know if the finance committee meeting is canceled?
Charlie,
No. Charlie.
Not through subdivision control.
How else can you do it?
There's no lots though.
So the 81X process is an alternate process for essentially creating lots. And again, whether or not those lots are considered buildable is going to be under the purview of the builder inspector to determine at that time. So you could make 1,000 little lots on this piece of property if you wanted to. It's not going to do you any good.
Carlos, on 81X, it says no registry of deeds.
Yeah, I think so.
Depends on where you are.
Really?
Where you are.
I'm hoping it's going to be now. You got me? I'm always in black. Well, you have to set.
Oh, snow.
I'm in service this week. So I think we canceled 5, 6 inches. I don't think they'll. Gotta get the Huskies on this sled. I gotta look at my apartment building first. Excuse me. I already signed it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ready for coming?
Go ahead. Still making copies. We're not limited to what we have in my hands. You do it?
We have them all, yep.
Who doesn't have it? Killing those trees. We'll recycle this, I promise. Anybody else need a copy of this?
I do actually, because I surrendered mine.
So we need a minute or two to continue going through the material.
Yes, please, thank you.
Sure. So would the applicant like to make an initial statement to start the hearing? Has anything changed, or would you like to add anything to the previous, not testimony, but previous statements made at the last hearings?
Good evening, my name is Adam Brodsky, and I represent the applicant. I'd simply like to remind the board that we're seeking modification of a final site plan approval that had not been appealed. We designed the modification in consultation with the town to meet all of your additional requirements. And by your, I mean the town's additional requirements, not necessarily the planning board, but from the input we got from the town. I don't think we have anything more to add. There were some additional questions, not with respect to the modification at the end of the last hearing. I thought it was the consensus of the planning board that the modified plan actually met the town's requirements. But there were some questions regarding the original site plan approval. I respectfully suggested that that issue was not before the planning board. I thought it inappropriate for the planning board to go and revisit the original site plan approval that had not been appealed and that has been in full force and effect since 2014. My recollection is that the planning board wanted to consult with town council regarding that issue. I'm not sure that those were the issues that were, those don't appear to be the issues that were referenced in the emails that was provided. But we're here to answer any questions the board has and provide any additional information we can provide so we get a decision on the request for modification of the site plan approval.
I have a question for him. Who in the town is helping him develop the plans?
To the council, is there somebody in the town that you're working with to develop the plans or understand how this fits within the context of the zoning regulations?
Building commissioner?
Went through the ZBA and the building commissioner. So we heard all of the comments from the zoning board of appeals and modified the plan to address those comments.
Okay. Have there been any findings issued by the building enforcement officer or the zoning enforcement officer?
There's no application in front of the building commissioner, so I don't know why you would issue any findings.
Okay. I know the abutter here's here as well. Is there anything that you'd like to add?
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Ginny Kramer. I'm counsel for Abutter Gordon Andrews. So I just wanted to point out a few things, and I appreciate the questions from the board and the responses from town council. So I just wanted to point out that the only plan that's recorded, the one that's referenced in their site plan approval application, is this plan here, and I can hand it out to the board. This is the one that they actually reference themselves, and there is no roadway on that plan. Yet, again and again, they have described Amanda's Way as a private drive. And I think that it's clear, and your town council's opinions have been clear, that the way to create a private drive is through subdivision, the definitive subdivision approval process. In fact, in our Commonwealth, we have one expert go-to guy, attorney in the Town Council Association, Sid Smithers, who wrote the handbook on streets and ways in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. It's cited often by judges and lawyers, and he states that private ways, if they are intended to constitute frontage for zoning purposes, must be laid out and constructed in accordance with the provision of subdivision control law, GL Chapter 41, Sections 81K to 81GG. So there's no way to create a private way other than by going through the subdivision control process. And there's a lot of confusion even among municipal council about the distinctions between public ways and private ways. It is true that there's only 3 ways to create a public way. Currently, only one. You have to go through the process if it's not an ancient way and if it hasn't been acquired by prescription. And then after it's laid out by the Board of Selectmen, then it does have to be accepted at town meeting in order to become a public way. But that doesn't mean that everything that's built but not accepted is a private way. There's also a definition of what is a private way, and that requires subdivision control. Additionally, as one of your questions was about Zone 2. So there's, as you are aware, there is a limit in your zoning bylaw of 1,500 gallons per day per lot for a septic system. So if a lot is used for anything other than a single family, which of course this one will be used for other than a single family, the maximum capacity of the septic system for the entire lot is 1,500 gallons per day. So in this case, the applicant is proposing that what are depicted as lots and what are lots, and there's no such distinction in your zoning bylaw or anywhere else between a lot and a subdivision control lot. A lot is a lot is a lot. So what these are lots, and without going through the process to create them, which requires subdivision control, if they're not created, you have one lot, and then the maximum that you could have for your septic system for the entire property is 1,500 gallons per day. And of course, the plan is to exceed that by a magnitude of 6, I believe. And there was also a question, will the lots shown on the submitted plan need to be identified on a deed or a recorded plan in order to meet the town's definition of a lot? And your council's answer was that referenced section 167-7D2A, which requires that each building in a multifamily development be located on an individual lot with adequate frontage, which she's already opined is the 150 feet clearly set out in section 167-11 of your zoning bylaw. And so those lots do have to be on a deed or recorded deed or plan. And right now, of course, neither of those things exists. And they're proposing not to go through the subdivision control process, which again, wouldn't create either the roadway or the lots that they're depicting on their plan. What they're saying is that somehow this roadway was created via a prior site plan approval, but of course you cannot create a private road via site plan approval. So I think that, those are the highlights of what I wanted to point out about this and the problems inherent with this proposal, which is attempt to get around the fact that the approved plans that were approved by this board in 2014 and the special permit that was issued based on the same plan in 2015 by the ZEBA depicted 6 lots separated by lot lines, and as the court found, this board required in its site plan approval that the lots be created. As the court found, the applicant knew that that's what this board was requiring, yet they had no intention of doing that, and are now trying to back into a way to shoehorn this in a way that fits within your zoning bylaw. And I think that, the questions that your board has asked and that your council has responded to shows the inherent problem with their trying to get very creative with the assistance, I guess, of the building inspector and try to back into allowing something that simply isn't allowed without an amendment to your zoning bylaws. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So now Attorney Kessel, am I pronouncing that right? Is it Quessel? So I know there's been a great deal of, different opinions on, the distinction of lots and private versus public roadways, and I know you've had a chance to review some of the information and as it relates to our zoning bylaws. And you attempted to clarify the distinction of a private way and what constitutes a private way, how it gets created, and whether or not this project is currently presented would meet the definition of the lots being fronted or providing the frontage on the private way. So I don't know if you could maybe take a minute just to walk us through how that would happen, whether or not the roadway that's there today and the lots as they're currently presented do meet the definitions of the lots and the frontage on the private way, which is what I understand this is being classified as. Is that correct? Amanda's Way is a private way?
It's a private way as previously found by the Zoning Board of Appeals of the special permit.
Okay.
So I'm not really sure that I necessarily agree with that. I think that it can either be a private way or an internal drive, because you cannot create a private way without going through subdivision control law, as I already opined. You can, under site plan review, there's under section 28, there's references to internal ways, access ways, things like that. This all goes back to the problem is that we have a discrepancy in the bylaw when it comes to multifamily developments. We have a discrepancy by the definition, and then we have a discrepancy under 7D. We have a discrepancy in section 11. There's a footnote that there's also a discrepancy. So it all kind of goes back to that discrepancy. This right now before you is a modification of a site plan that has been approved that was not appealed. So you are confined to the modification. And I think that the question is that I'm not very clear on is what exactly is the modification, what's being sought. It appears that what's being sought, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, anyone, is originally they had a subdivision, there were no lot lines, and then They came in, they put lot lines on, and then they came in to have those lot lines removed. That was the request. The request then somehow morphed into reconfiguring the lot lines. Is that correct? Is that what you're looking for? Is that
That's a request. We came to the planning board with a new plan, removing the lines, since that was seemed to be the obstacle of the Dredge Bay and the land court. This board referred the matter to the zoning board of appeals, and the zoning board of appeals voted, so, I forget what the exact number of votes. We did not have a supermajority, we had a majority, but not a supermajority of the board, not to grant the modification.
4-3, I think.
It was 4-3. I can't remember how many people ultimately voted, but I think it was 4-3. But the zoning board of appeals had expressed, or several of the dissenting members of the board of appeal had expressed a desire to see lots on Amanda's Way with 150 feet of frontage. And I should note, I should also reference the site plan approval from September 22, 2014, found that the road is to be and remain as a private way. So that was an additional finding of the planning board in addition to whatever the zoning board of appeals did. So we reconfigured the lots to show 150 feet of frontage on Amanda's Way, which is a private way. And then we reconfigured the buildings such that we complied with also now your requirement to show each building on a lot with continuous frontage on a private way. And I would just like to reinforce that 167D does not say 150 feet of continuous frontage, it just says continuous frontage. So we kept there are 2 buildings, there are 4 units that are already substantially constructed, that haven't been built out, but they're watertight. And then we've reconfigured the other buildings so that we're showing that each building has frontage, has 150 feet of continuous frontage on Amanda's Way. And those are the changes to the plan.
So it's really only 2 changes, right? Combining the buildings, so now that there are 2 fourplexes and 2 duplexes instead of, it was
We had
6 duplexes.
6 two-unit buildings, so that's correct.
And changing the lot lines, and those are the only 2 things that have changed on the plan that we have before us today.
Correct.
Can you ask Amy where in our bylaw it states the definition for our internal driveway?
There is no definition. If you go to section 28, there's nothing that comes right out and says you can have an internal driveway, you can't have an internal driveway. And I suspect that under 28, under site plan, the requirements are meant for large, like commercial developments. So when you drive into, say, you drive into Walmart, you drive around, there's parking. So it says in section 28, you have to provide for access, you have to show all of the access ways, you have to show the lane widths, you have to show the directions. There's fire department input, things like that, that would indicate that under site plan review, the planning board is allowed to approve an internal drive. You're allowed to approve internal circulation of a site.
Where in our bylaw does it show us how to make an internal drive?
That's just part of the site plan review that we do for any traditional development.
You wouldn't actually, you would just be reviewing it. An engineer would design it, you would review it under site plan review.
But how would we know what an internal drive is if there was no definition and how to actually have it approved?
It would be an access drive. You would ensure that that it's safe. You would ensure that I don't know what your board's procedure is, but usually you would ask for input from the fire department to make sure that they can do proper circulation with their largest truck. They have special studies that engineers can do that. Other things such as, do you need a stop sign at a certain point? Do you need a stop sign at the end? Things like that the planning board, in my opinion, is under your purview under site plan, is internal circulation.
And this already occurred?
I don't know, unfortunately, I wasn't here in the last, when this was approved, I was not.
To the best of my knowledge, this was reviewed, I believe it was also peer reviewed at the time as well, and the roadway hasn't changed then, so I think that was part of the review, the drainage, the design of the grading, the stormwater management systems, preliminary concepts of the septic. I think all that was reviewed as part of the previous design.
It met the standard of any other road in town.
I do want to say, I'm almost certain there was no peer review done of that, just from my
Okay.
intense familiarity with the.
Is that correct?
That's incorrect.
There was a peer review?
Joe?
Yes, Merrill Engineering was hired by the town to review our plans.
Mr. Andrews?
There was no peer review done of this project. They suggested that the peer review was previously done under the subdivision that came before the board, but there was no peer review done of this particular set of plans.
The road, the infrastructure had been peer reviewed. The application then changed, and it was determined that there was no need to have Merrill review the very same plans since the roadway and the infrastructure remained identical.
Okay.
If I may just say one thing, in any event, as this board required the creation of individual lots, I mean that, the creation of this private way was approved by this board in conjunction with the entire thing going through the subdivision, a plan approval process, at which time a lot of those things will be looked at. So, you know, that was what this board was thinking when it issued that site plan approval, and that's what the judge found, that there was going to be a subdivision plan, definitive subdivision approval process that took place afterward. They decided to scuttle that altogether, so that never occurred. So now for them to say, well, this is a created and approved private way, when the process that this board, as required by state law, envisioned occurring thereafter, they just elected not to participate in it.
And I think it's pretty clear now that there's no intention to go through subdivision control.
That's right, and that was not the requirement of the planning board at the time, you may recall.
I don't ever believe that being an issue. I don't,
Right.
when we looked at it
We needed to
before,
show
that
the
was
lot,
not-
the lots on the lot lines on the plan, which is what we did. And there's no requirement of the land court that we subdivide.
Yeah, so just to clarify also, that there was always some confusion with the lot lines. I was under the, I always believed that they weren't required in this type of thing. And then the planning board required the lot lines. So this new modification really actually just goes with what the planning board had asked of the applicant previously. We've already asked them to actually add the lot lines in the past, which this modification
did.
addresses.
We approved site plan approval,
That's-
and the special permit has the plan showing the.
So one of the two things that they're asking for in the modification is something we've already asked of them. So that seems like it's a,
And then for a point of clarification, even though this particular iteration of the plan may not have been peer reviewed by Merrill, it
but
was
that the
circulated.
project and the road has been, yes.
This plan,
But-
as previously designed and constructed, was reviewed by the fire department, by various other town boards as part of that review
Absolutely.
process.
Yeah.
Is there any documentation of the peer review?
I'm
I'm sure there would be.
Anybody have it?
Presume you would find it within
It
the
would-
building jacket of the
Yeah,
town
we'd have to-
files.
I've never gone through the filing system, but I'm sure we could find it if you wanted. Is that something you're interested in?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Mr. Andrews?
At the time, the planning board required that each building be on a separate lot. Mr. Webby said that he would go for variances to the zoning board if they needed. So you need, each building needs to be on a lot that has 150 feet of frontage. They're telling you now that this is a private way, but they haven't created the private way. We heard the town council opinion that the only way to create the private way is through subdivision control. So that way doesn't exist, and those lots don't exist. And the only way to create lots with frontage is to go through subdivision control.
So I think the distinction, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the applicant's counsel's position is that the way is not a way in the context of subdivision control law, which would go through the subdivision process, but it's a general way, and due to the lack of a definition that we have.
You can't create a way after the town's accepted subdivision control unless it goes through subdivision control, or unless it goes through 42.
message.
So this is a question, again, Attorney Plessel, as it relates to this matter of the private way and/or creation of a private way that has no definition in our zoning bylaw. Is that something that's subject to our deliberation or review as part of the current modification process? And
Sorry.
And if so, is that a matter for the planning board, or is that a zoning board matter for the creation of lots and demonstrating frontage and/or variances and relief from frontage on a private or public way?
So, just to add to matters, that in my opinion, the bylaw is very, there's a discrepancy in the bylaw. And to add to that, we received in my opinion, a very vague and confusing decision from the land court that remanded it back to, essentially to the applicant to decide what to do next. And this is what the applicant has decided to do next. So, I do not read anywhere in the land court decision that they have to create lots on a private way. Under the zoning bylaw, I don't know, there's no other real way to do that. So under the land court decision, the judge simply just had them said that they could go back to the planning board seeking a modification to remove lot lines. And that, or to go to the zoning board of appeals to receive relief from that. And that's kind of morphed into what we have in front of us now. And so what we have in front of us now is if they are seeking frontage on a private way, that private way has to be a private way under Chapter 41, which is subdivision control. However, if we go back to the discrepancy in the zoning bylaw, are they just simply seeking to create lots for a multifamily development?
Well, what's the distinction between the two scenarios that you just...
The distinction is that the site plan was approved. It was part of this whole this land court review. It was in front of the land court, and this never came up to the land court. The land court simply said, remove the lot lines. In my opinion, removing the lot lines would have still created confusion because of the zoning bylaw. So it is before you. For a short answer of your question, it is in front of you because they are seeking lots, and if they're going to seek individual lots, they have to be on a private way.
So you also made reference to essentially the 81X process to create lots that don't necessarily have frontage for the purpose of creating buildable lots.
Correct. If they wanted to, if there was some way to create a buildable lot that didn't require frontage, you could do that through an 81X plan. That doesn't mean that just recording an 81X plan does not mean that the lot is buildable.
But it creates lots.
It does create lots, but it does not create buildable lots. I just want to make that clear.
Buildable lots under the typical single-family home requirements.
Under any requirement. An 81X plan can be filed. It can be filed stating, it's filed by a surveyor who has to, they have to attest to certain things. But the ultimate arbitrator of whether a lot is buildable or not is either the planning board under 81P or the building inspector under the zoning bylaw.
Was there an 81X?
No.
I don't believe
No, I don't
any
think
sort
so.
of parcelization of the property has happened.
If I could just offer one correction. What the land court found, remanded the matter to the zoning board of appeals with an order that the ZBA revoke the building permits as they were issued illegally, as Mr. Andrews had argued. Thereafter, the developer filed a motion to stay the judge's decision, in other words, saying don't force the ZBA to revoke the building permits just yet. Please give us an opportunity to go back to the town for relief. So it wasn't, the judge wasn't the one saying what the relief was, but was giving an opportunity to the developer to try to fix it within the confines of the zoning bylaw. So the order by the judge was to have the building permits revoked.
I specifically recall, and unfortunately I don't have my file with me, I didn't think I was going to be here tonight,
Okay.
but I specifically recall in the judge's decision, there was a mention of removing lot lines. It was towards the end of the decision. So we did contemplate that.
Can I offer a different way of looking at this, which is that your bylaw's a mess. Your approvals of multifamily developments have been inconsistent, leading to greater confusion. But what isn't in dispute is the fact that the planning board and the zoning board of appeals in 2014 and 2015 approved a private way known as Amanda's Way, presumably because it met the town's requirements, provided safe access onto the property. And your approval specifically places conditions, shall remain a private way. To go back and revisit those decisions to talk about, and I should note that the private way was constructed in reliance upon the unappealed site plan approval and special permit. So there is a private way on the ground built in compliance with the town's permits that have been in place now for 4 or 5 years. I don't think you're going to get any clarity by going back and figure out, was that right, was that wrong, because your bylaw doesn't provide guidance in that respect. I would respectfully suggest this thing exists. It provides safe access to the property. And what we have done, again, the recommendation of the minority members of the zoning board is simply to create lots on that way with the requisite frontage, despite the fact that we do not believe that a multifamily development requires 150 feet of frontage. We're trying to do that to meet the town, more than halfway. We're trying to go to the town's view of this world in order to finish this project, which has now been held in abeyance for several years. That, again, I don't think you've heard anyone testify that this is a bad project, that this project is creating some kind of nuisance, that this project is creating traffic, odors, light. I mean, there's been no indication that this is a bad project. And I think, unfortunately, the board is following the rabbit into the warren because that benefits Mr. Andrews and his case here, which is to try and now, years later, to defeat the project. So all I can say is that you have a way that's safe, that was reviewed by Merrill Engineer, that was approved by the Planning Board and the Zoning Board of Appeals, that was constructed in conformance with those plans, and it exists. And to suggest otherwise, I think, places everyone at peril.
Is there an 81X, any subdivision control, a town meeting vote that approved this private way?
No.
Where is the purview from Merrill? Does anybody have that, if it happened?
Right, so you've asked that question,
I want the
I've answered that.
documentation.
I don't have a copy of the Merrill Engineering reports. They should be in the town's
I
files.
was asking the question, can you have him wait until I'm done and then answer and not cut me off, please?
Happy to wait till you're done, Mr.
Yeah, let's just run the questions through the chair and we'll try and keep this civilized.
I want to know where if it occurred, it would be good documentation for us to see. Because
I don't believe that the road would have gotten built and it would have made it through the planning process originally were it deemed to be unsafe and not meet the town regulations.
If I may, in addition to not causing a nuisance and not being unsafe and all of those things, they're also required to comply with the zoning bylaw of the town. Now, this plan right here shows 2 buildings on 2 lots. And your zoning bylaw requires that each building in a multifamily development be located on an individual lot with adequate frontage. So this doesn't comply with your zoning bylaw.
It does. The buildings have been joined so that they're 4plexes instead of duplexes.
It's
So
just
they have a
one,
breezeway and now they're not separate buildings?
it's just one building, yeah.
I believe, are they enclosed breezeways?
We haven't
As long as its foundation is
Yeah,
connected and it's a
connected
building,
to the barn.
that's a building issue, that's not really our thing. But that's certainly one building, as we would define any building in town.
And additionally, you know, is a clear intent to get around the fact that they don't have adequate frontage for 6 separate buildings, so just connecting them and calling it only 4 buildings. Your original site plan approval required as a separate condition that Amanda's Estates will be a private way, and it would always remain a private way. And the fact that it may have been approved as site plan approval process, and the fact that it may exist does not make it a private way. Your land use council has stated in writing and here tonight, the only way to create a private way in Massachusetts is via subdivision approval. That's the only way to do it. So you can't just say, well, you know, it was on a plan, you said it was okay, and now it's built, so there it is, a private way. It's not a private way. A private way is something that is created through the subdivision approval process, and that's a process that they have elected to not pursue. So it's not a private way.
So I don't think that's accurate, but town council may be all the way on this. I mean, there are other forms of developments, like cluster developments, where you have zoning boards of appeals approving internal driveways. So there are ways, and that's another way of doing it. And I always understood your multifamily development was similar to, I call it flexible open space, but is to you know, take a piece of property and do something different with it other than your typical subdivision, because subdivisions are already allowed within the town. And so I think it was perfectly appropriate at the time for both the planning board and the zoning board of appeals to approve this way without regard to subdivision. So I do think there's another path forward, but again, I'll defer to town council on that.
So I will, I guess, defer to town council on that question, in that the definition, again, of a private way and whether or not the only available pathway to creating a private way is through, in fact, the subdivision control, or is a more general definition that could be applied to or might be interpreted as a private way that's not subject to subdivision control.
You can have ways that are not subject to subdivision control. They wouldn't be a public way or a private way. They would be an internal drive. So, for example, in addition to you know, some of these open space flexible developments, you could just go back to a condominium complex. There are some towns that usually more densely populated towns that allow condominiums, and they have a provision for a special permit under the from the zoning board of appeals or whomever the special permit granting authority would be, that allow for condominiums, and a condominium most certainly has an internal private drive. It doesn't have a private way or a public way. Your bylaw has a definition of condominium, but it doesn't have any provision for them that I can find.
Right, so I think the thing that we're somewhat stuck on is the fact that the multifamily housing identifies that it needs to provide the frontage on a public or private way. Mm-hmm. So I guess the question is, private way not having a formal definition in our zoning bylaw, could it be open to interpretation that a private way is just any road, drive, or way that's not public?
So there could be that interpretation. There could also be the interpretation that because it's not defined, you have to go with chapter 41. And unfortunately, there's not much helping us in this in the bylaw, because there is no the private way is stated in 7D, but it's not defined anywhere. You have, under your site plan review, under 28, you have provisions for internal access and things like that. So it's just, it can be interpreted either way. It's unfortunate that this is not something that the land court looked at, and that it's come down to you guys to make that interpretation.
The land court did opine on the fact that the buildings should be placed on individual lots. Was that part? Am I?
No, that's not my understanding. And again,
Just said that the building permit application did not show I guess, the building on each lot that was required because attached to this site plan approval was the plan that showed those lines.
So the judge was going off of the plan that was in front of him, it appears from the decision that I've read at least 10 times. It appears that he was going off of the,
Right, it's the site plan approval that was attached to you.
rather than looking at the definitions and looking at the
But
bylaw.
that plan has lots. if I'm
There's
looking-
lots,
Yes,
that's
yes.
right. So he found a discrepancy between the building permit application and this plan.
And the
So that was the basis for rescinding the building permit. That was the sole reason.
Because the lots
So-
don't exist.
So I don't want to confuse this because I'm trying to simplify it. And this is another deficiency in your zoning bylaw. If you look at most towns, when they talk about, what's a road or a street, it's usually created by one of three ways. One, it's a public way adopted by a town. Two, it's a way created by subdivision control. Or three, it's a way that's been approved by the planning board that has suitable width, blah, 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 blah. That's your typical bylaw. Again, your bylaw doesn't have that language in it, so we're still left in this confusion. All I can say is what I said previously. Private way, approved, constructed. I don't think it's appropriate
But
to
not
revisit
created.
that.
If it's not in our bylaw, I don't know how we should be looking at other towns. Like, should we pull out Quincy's and say, oh, well, Quincy has it, so we should have it?
Well, I think the zoning is going to vary so drastically from municipality to municipality that trying to look at their definitions there isn't going to help us out too much.
Well, that's kind of what I was thinking is, our bylaws are our bylaws, Hanover's bylaws are Hanover's bylaws, et cetera, et cetera. So other towns' bylaws, we have to go by what the bylaws we have in the town of Halifax, right? So I want to know where the definition of internal driveway is, or if somebody could cite a definition of a turtle driveway that another town has, so that we'd have an idea.
I guess my question back would be how does that factor into the decision here?
Well, in the decision here, or the opinion of our town council, Amy Creswell, is that right? Creswell?
It's Questle,
Sorry,
that's fine.
it's hard to,
It is very hard,
sorry,
don't worry.
I don't mean to.
I'm used to it.
Where is it? She states internal driveway, but if we don't have internal driveway, then how are we supposed to make decisions based on it, which is what I just asked her a few minutes ago.
No, I think whether or not it's an internal drive or a driveway is somewhat not relevant in that the zoning bylaw indicates, I forget which section, but it indicates that for a multifamily development, they have to have continuous frontage on a public or private way. Right, so my question would be whether or not that road that's been constructed can meet a definition of a private way to satisfy that requirement. If whether or not it's considered an internal site drive or whatever it is, I don't know if that's all that much.
But then I would refer to subdivision control and state that it says there is a prohibition on private ways.
That was the subdivision control.
Yes.
So we do not create new public ways for the purpose of creating frontage for development. And I don't know that this plan is necessarily creating a private way in order to create frontage for developable parcels. And I think that's the distinguishment here, in that were they to create this plan, you would have to go through the 81X process to create lots to put the buildings on so that they could be joined with the building application for the buildings on the individual lots. Whether or not those lots are then deemed to be buildable, I think that's a determination that would be made by the building inspector at that time. So I think unfortunately that part of it is outside of our purview, whether or not these lots that get created, if they do get created, would be buildable or not.
Well, yeah, but what about, if we're sitting here trying to say whether it's had an 81X or if it's had an engineered, what is it, from Merrick, was it?
A subdivision, yeah, from Merrill Engineers.
or subdivision control and we have none of the above, all I can think of is would an internal driveway be like AKA common driveway, and those are not allowed in our town either.
Except as expressly provided for these types of developments. For commercial developments, you have parking lots that serve multiple tenants, multiple buildings that essentially have internal circulation drives. So I think in those instances, for single-family homes, they're not allowed to have common driveways, just like all the other regulations we have for single-family homes and retreat lots. This is a special section of the zoning that has its own dimensional requirements for those kinds of things. I think the question is on whether or not these lots need to provide frontage on a public or private way, and whether or not this road that's currently there, this driveway that's there, however you want to classify it, meets the definition of a private way.
So under my understanding, it needs an 81X, a subdivision control, or, and the 81X would have to go to town meeting for a vote. Is this what I'm understanding?
No, the 81X is an approval not required plan, basically.
That's an 81P.
Sorry.
81X plan is actually different. I don't mean to interrupt. That's an 81P is an approval not required.
But essentially the same process. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but the planning board is not necessarily involved. It's essentially the applicant's surveyor that prepares the plan. You take it to the registry, you record it. You've essentially got a plan that now shows lots. Whether or not those lots are buildable is up to the building inspector to determine at that time.
Now, my next question that just occurred to me is why would we be here right now if they already had the road and were in front of zoning and needed these lots? Why wouldn't they have just gone for the lots right there off of a road that was already created?
Yeah, so my
It doesn't
question's
make sense.
very similar. Like, why are we here? Like, this is an approved thing that's already been approved by the planning board and by the zoning board of appeals. Like, I think I have a similar question, but not with the same basis of why are we going over this or questioning this now? It just seems crazy that we had an applicant that we helped through this entire process, that got help through every single board, and now that there's like people thinking about revoking all of that. I mean, these people already went through and we gave them our okay, just like we do every time someone comes in. We try to help them out, we try to tell them what we think they need, then we approve it and say good luck. We say that to everybody. And then some reason we're back here thinking that we're gonna,
I don't think we're alone in this though, because zoning just denied it and here we are back here. So if they were going to have, if we were going to have, if we're now looking at a private way that was already determined, why wouldn't zoning have just taken it then?
so I don't think zoning board did deny it
doesn't make
though,
any
right?
sense.
Zoning board did not deny
They
it.
denied a plan that did not have lot lines on it.
But
So, I
my
just-
question is why would they be going for no lot lines if they had a private way?
I think
All
they're trying
right, so
to
the whole
find a
problem
way
is
through the
because
system.
somebody complained after the fact, right? Like, they've already satisfied everyone in town.
Excuse me.
They had no reason to not continue to go forward. You know, this is unprecedented as far as I'm concerned, where like, we've already
But
given
that was all
them our
before.
okay.
That was all before, and I wasn't on the planning board, so I did not give my okay.
Yeah.
But the zoning on November 4th just denied this based on the fact that they needed lot lines. If they had a street, why did they need to go for no lot lines? That doesn't really make any sense. It just occurred to me as we were all sitting here and we're discussing it and putting it all together. If you had a street, why wouldn't you have just used the frontage then, instead of going through all of this, and now all of a sudden, where's your 81X? We don't have one.
Because under
Where's subdivision
multifamily
control?
development, you don't make the subdivision and the subdivision road.
Says where?
Says the multifamily development.
Or rather, it
That's
doesn't
the
say
difference.
anything about it anywhere, which is the problem. It doesn't say it one way or the other.
Individual lots.
But no one would propose a
But how do we
multifamily
make
development
individual lots?
with a subdivision plan. That doesn't, that's a reason that we have two different plans.
So remember when we were doing the River Street, Pratt Street A&Rs, and they had to have certain frontages for them to do an A&R? And you said that doesn't make them buildable, they just have to have the contiguous frontage. So we were looking at all of that, okay? And now let's go to a couple weeks ago when we had, off of Hayward, Hilda.
Yep.
We couldn't allow the common driveway to continue forth, and we needed to make sure that they went through subdivision control for that road.
Correct.
So it's a little, so that's how they had those lots created, correct?
For single-family homes, yes.
What is the difference between, I think that our whole entire bylaw says the same thing, we need 150 feet of frontage. It doesn't specify anything different in our chart.
No, but there is subsection 12, 16712, which does have specific density regulations for specific uses, and it has specific requirements for multifamily development.
But then we'll get back to my same old question. What zone is it being built in?
I think it's irrelevant because you have to get a special permit from the zoning board of appeals to build it in whatever district you're proposing to build it in.
But you still have to comply with the chart, and it says it.
I don't know that you do,
How?
in that there are specific requirements under section 16712A that talk about the requirements for the setbacks, for the parcel size, for the percentage that has to be perked on the grid. So there's specific requirements for that. So I guess and there's some confusion as it relates to the underlying requirement for the pre-development parcel and what the requirements are there, but my understanding is that that aspect of this review is not necessarily subject to the modification that we have in front of us. Is that correct?
Correct. Correct.
So whether or not the original parcel was developable, or whether or not it provides the buffers from the roadway that have already been approved and constructed, I think those are
See,
outside of the purview.
that's the question now. Is it, or are we just being told it is? Because we don't have any documentation. And I'm gonna go right back to the zoning. Why did zoning say no? And then why would you even go and ask for no lots if you had a road and you could create the frontage?
Because I think they're trying to find a way through the system, and the
So
zoning is
is there a
confusing.
road or is there not a road?
There's a physical road there, yes.
But is it approved and through any of the ways that you can do it? Because I don't know how zoning would say no and they would go for not, do you see this?
I see that they got all the approvals they initially sought from the town through site plan review and zoning, and they built this road, a driveway, access path, whatever you want to call it. They built the pavement and the sidewalk and the drainage and all the infrastructure that goes with that.
Did you find out about that loop system?
For the water now. So again, that's one of the things that hasn't changed. I don't think that's necessarily within our purview for this particular review.
Well, I think it always is part of our purview, so why is it not now?
Well, again, to Attorney Kressel, is it correct that the only things subject to our review and deliberation for the modification in front of us are just the modifications that include the lot lines and the reconfiguration of the buildings?
It's what they're asking for, yes. Whatever they're asking for as the modification is what's in front of you. I'm not aware of the water loop or whatever, but that would be part of the infrastructure which is already in, which was approved under the previous.
But with the modifications, it was Carlos's question last week, with the modifications, it would require a loop system with this new way, and that we would need to have happen for the safety of the street. And so if it's safety.
My question last week was whether or not the system was looped. So there was a couple areas where they didn't meet the requirements with the original development or with this current one, because they haven't changed. So there was the buffering requirement along Amanda's Way, which technically they don't meet. The same thing too with the looped water main system. Technically, they don't meet that requirement, but it was reviewed and approved as part of the original
But this
permit.
is a modification and there's changes that require it now, so I don't know how there would be.
What would the changes be that require it now? There's the same
Carlos?
I don't know that there
the
are.
same amount of units?
I don't believe that there are. It's
Water systems in.
I think I tried to get this across last. My understanding is that these modifications have almost no impact on this project. I can't have, I welcome anyone to explain how those lot lines on a piece of paper change the impact of this project.
Because of the bylaws of the town of Halifax, whom we work for.
I will say that there would be changes, right? So obviously the building now will need to be sprinkled. There'll be some difference in the fire flow demand and the water in the overall infrastructure. The septic will have to change a little bit to accommodate the clustering of the buildings, and that'll all have to be reviewed by Board of Health as well.
In my opinion, those would be those with low impact.
And we still need to go back to the zoning board of appeals, zoning board of appeals to approve this plan. So if you approve this modification, I just want to remind the board, we're going back to the ZBA. I also want to remind the board that we went forward with the no lot line plan because that was consistent with how you handled the other project in 2016, but the board didn't want to do it that way, so that's why this is our plan B. So it's not like we came up with this crazy notion. The board waived the requirement of lot lines for Halifax trails in 2016, and that's why we pursued that, because we thought that was a reasonable way forward.
Which is also not within our ability to waive such a large thing without the town's approval, so it's actually.
Correct, and we're not going to do that, and that's not part of what we're talking about here. I think that's just background on how they arrived at the process that they pursued with the zoning board that ultimately got kicked back to now have the lot lines back on here.
But my point is we can't waive anything that large, so what another board did, because I wasn't on this board then, and I don't know how that can be waived. I don't see any way in our, and now zoning has just backed that up.
All right, well, just so you know, like, this proposal isn't asking for that waiver.
Right, but if that's gonna bring me right to the loop of if they had a street, why would they come to us and ask us for no lot lines, go to zoning, ask us for no lot lines, get denied, and now they're back here
I think I can
asking for
answer
lot
that.
lines, because if there was a street, why would you even have bothered to go through, how many months now are we on?
Because when they came through the first time, they did exactly what the planning board asked. And now someone has challenged it, so they're asking for something different.
Actually,
That's
on
the only
September
reason.
5th, I was asking Brodsky how we got here, because I wasn't here. And I said, can you please show me the plan that was approved? He showed me the one with lot lines. And I said, okay, which one did you build? He said, the one without lot lines. And then I said, what did the judge say? It's on camera. I can pull it up for you if you would like.
So
I'm
Hold
still
on for
talking.
1 second.
So that's what I was talking about you interrupting me.
Ms. True.
So I am telling you that he stated that the judge said that he needed lot lines. So if he had a street, why would we be going to court? Why would we be coming through, now we're on 3.5 months of meetings, if he had a street already? Why is it coming up on, what's today, December 2nd, instead of September 5th? Why?
Because they got taken to court because the planning.
No,
the
September
building-
5th, 2019, why wasn't it told to us that they had a street?
I don't know that that was an issue at that time.
Yeah,
So
I
now
don't-
the issues before is
Why would
because
they create an issue like that
because
without necessarily needing it?
it's
Like if there was
turned
a
into an
street,
issue.
why would they create we don't want lot lines, and now they have lot lines? Why would that occur? It doesn't make sense, and if you sit back and think about it, it doesn't make sense.
Well, it wasn't defined at the time, at the approval, as a actual public way or as a private way through subdivision control. It was a road referred to as a private way, so now they went to zoning, they tried to get approval without the lot lines under the premise that it was essentially a site drive and that the lines didn't need to be created in order to get approval. The zoning board obviously felt otherwise, and they felt that the parcels or the lot lines needed to be created. Each building had to have a building on its own lot line, and it had to demonstrate that it had to have 150 feet of frontage on this way that's already constructed.
But is it, what I'm saying is if it was already there on September 5th, why would they have gone through the whole process of trying to not have lot lines if they could have just created the lots on the private way, internal driveway? We're not really sure.
Because that was how the decision got handed down from the court. Listening to our attorney, Questle, it sounds like that the judgment was essentially do something to not have the lot lines because that appears to be an issue that's preventing this from getting approved because that doesn't match what the building permit had. So I think they were trying to rectify the building permit application that had no lot lines with the site plan that did show lot lines. So I think they were trying to get them into alignment.
But did they go through subdivision control, 81X? We don't have internal driveway, we don't have
No.
common driveway.
Because the lot
So,
line
I don't-
issue is something that's before us today. Typically, you wouldn't go through that process until after you have your approvals, because that's just a formality at that point.
So, did they go through any of those processes to get that?
No, they have not.
So I have a selfish
So,
request.
are they gonna go through
Mr.
subdivision
Andrews
control?
has had his hand up.
Yeah, if I could just answer your question, Mr. Melius. Like every other developer, builder, homeowner in the Commonwealth, you have to comply with the own plans that you submit. And while I understand that you thought that you were just saying, just draw them on, and that they didn't actually count as lot lines in 2014, there's actually, in the minutes, you can see Mr. Webby clearly represent to this board that frontage variances were gonna be required or would be sought from the ZBA, and that the lots would be created. And, you know, whoever thought at the time, the one thing that we can all do is look at your decision, which requires Amanda's Way to be a private way, which can only be created through subdivision control. And we can look at the plans they actually submitted, which depicted lots. And what the judge said, and the reason we're back here, is because they didn't create those lots. They just didn't do it. They decided they didn't want to do it, and so they just didn't do it. And that is the reason we're back here, not because someone complained, because they're in violation of your zoning bylaw.
All right, so if I get you correctly, then the reason that we're back here is the judge said that he wants lots, and they're back here proposing lots.
The judge said,
Correct?
no, the judge said they need to
Wait.
file a plan that complies with the zoning bylaw and that the town can accept. But the judge didn't want to say what that plan could be or what it would look
But
like.
didn't you just tell us that the judge said that he wanted lots?
No, the judge said the plan that they submitted and that was approved
Yeah.
showed lots.
Okay.
Yet they didn't create the lots, so you can't do that. If you show lots, you have to create lots, and since they didn't, the building permit should have never issued, and then they said, well, please don't enforce that decision, let us try to figure something out in front of the town, so that's what they've been trying to do. But at the same time, your zoning bylaw clearly states that each building in a multifamily development has to be located on an individual lot with adequate frontage, which your council has opined is 150 feet. Now they have a plan in front of you, another one that shows lots, but they're saying, but those aren't actually lots, and we're not actually planning to create them. And even though this private way that we're required to have under your zoning bylaw was never approved in the way that private ways get legally approved in Massachusetts, let's just call it even because we built it, so, you know, let's move forward. And that's just not how it works. That's not how it works. There are rules, and if your zoning bylaw says you can't do it, you can't do it.
The problem that I have is that our subdivision control regulations expressly say that we're not allowed to build private ways. So how would a private way have been created had they gone through the subdivision process? It couldn't have happened.
That's been the issue from the very beginning. This doesn't fit on the property. It doesn't fit. They were given an okay. They show a plan with lots. They went and got building permits. They filled out the building permits and they said they had frontage on Amanda's Way. It wasn't 150 feet of frontage. And they called them different lots. The lots were never created. And there's no frontage on Amanda's Way because it doesn't exist. It's not a legal way that creates frontage. And now they're back before you with a 4-lot system on Amanda's Way. Amanda's Way is still yet to be created. It's not a private way that creates frontage. And they're telling you that they're not really going to create the lots because they're not going to go through subdivision control.
And they're gonna have septic systems that well in excess of what is required because they're saying this is actually gonna be one lot. And that might not be in front of you tonight, but you're not required to ignore the fact that there's gonna be a flagrant violation of the septic provisions, which allow a maximum of 1,500 gallons per day per lot.
Can we get a clarification on that? Do you intend to actually create lots on this through some sort of process that would be recorded on a plan?
We're not intending on subdividing the property.
So there's no lots.
So that's not what you're, so again, I mean, I hate to say this, and I was going to say this before, but selfishly, I don't want to drive home in a snowstorm. I think we've presented to you all of the information we possibly can provide and have asked all of your questions. All you're hearing over and over again are the same arguments that were made weeks ago, months ago. My request is, unless there's specific additional factual information we want from the applicants, that you please close the public hearing and issue a decision. Otherwise, we're going to continue to do this for hours, but we're not getting anywhere.
I do want to mention the zone 2, because I'm a realtor in town and I've sold houses in zone 2, and they have deed restricted the house to 2-bedroom numerous times because of the fact that they are in the zone.
Is there a specific section of the zoning?
So your town council said that's not an issue before the board. If we need a special permit to put these septic systems in the zone 2, we will have to go through that process.
So
it's an engineering question that we're not prepared to answer because there's no need to address.
I read all of these things after our last meeting,
These are all
before our last meeting, as you know.
Right. These are all scare tactics. Oh my God, there are other things wrong. This issue wasn't raised in 2014 and 2015. The bylaw remained in place. No, what they're saying is that even if you create the lots, you're still not going to meet the requirements for nitrogen load.
And our council has opined that if the lots do get created, they would meet the requirements. So I think there's some differing opinions there. So I'm comfortable with that aspect of it. Whether or not the uses in general are allowed, or if there's other permits that need to be applied for afterwards.
Any use regardless of lot size other than a single-family dwelling retaining less than 40% of the lot in natural vegetative state is a no.
And I don't know that they're not retaining less than 40%.
But they're going for a multifamily development in a zone 2 where only a single family is allowed.
But this is retaining, it's mostly gonna be still vegetated. I don't think they're looking to install a parking lot on this particular, each individual lot.
Oh, I thought they were. I thought that's why it would just be a drive and it would be, that's what I thought you were comparing to an industrial
No, so
property.
this one, and again, I think this is something that the overall development, I don't think that less than 40% of it is gonna be vegetated when it's all complete.
But what about the use not being allowed?
So that says any use regardless of lot size other than a single family dwelling retaining less than 40%. So any use retaining less than 40% is not allowed. This is any use and it's retaining more than 40% of the open space.
I don't know. Board of Health always makes zone 2 state of the bedrooms.
And there is a requirement in there for the total maximum allowed on each individual lot. And if they create lots, as they're currently showing on the plans, the plan before us has individual lots, and the septic generation for each building on those lots would be below that threshold.
And this plan will be recorded as we would record any site plan approval plan or any plan approved by the zoning board of appeals.
So it's not going to be subdivided.
Shall record any plan showing a division of a tract of land into 2 or more lots and ways, whether existing or proposed, providing access thereto in a city or town which subdivision control is in force. You can't create lots under X. You can't create new lots. They can't submit this plan and say that it meets 81X. You can't do that. They have to go through the subdivision control process. 81X doesn't allow them to put lots on here, doesn't allow them to create a way. That's why I showed you that plan earlier. That's the only plan on record. They can't create.
Can I see that for a second? I think there might be a distinction between the fact that they're referring to ways and you can't create ways through the 81X process. Yeah, so the actual language, right, it says for the record, section 81X, no register of deeds shall record any plan showing a division of a tract of land into 2 or more lots and ways, whether existing or proposed, providing access thereto in a city or town in which the subdivision control law is enforced. So I think the intent of this is to say that you cannot create new ways for the purpose of creating frontage. You can create all the lots you want, is my understanding.
You can't create lots on Amanda's way.
I thought Since you guys have been teaching me since I've been on here, it's A&R and subdivision control.
To create buildable lots for single-family homes that would meet the requirements of a traditional zoning that's otherwise in the dimensional requirements.
So for anything else, we don't need to do an A&R, they can just do whatever they want.
If you want to have a buildable lot to build a single-family house on, you need to either go through A&R to create a lot that meets the dimensional requirements, 40,000 square feet, 150 feet of frontage, all the rest of the irregularity requirements. If you want to make yourself 100 little lots, you can make yourself 100 little lots, you just can't build on them.
It'd be similar to, right, if you had a drainage lot in a subdivision, right? Those wouldn't meet any of the other requirements of a lot. It would just be the designated area for the drainage. And so it's still a lot that's created, it's not buildable. It doesn't meet any particular requirement, but it's a lot that gets created from our approval.
So there's no subdivision control, subdivision that's gonna happen.
I think it's been asked and answered a couple times that they do not intend to go through subdivision.
So then multifamilies have to be on their individual lot, so how does that work?
Again, I think we're back to the same thing again. You can create lots through the 81X process. Now, whether or not those lots would then have the required frontage on a public or private way is the question that everybody's getting hung up in, or at least I'm getting hung up on, and I think there's different opinions on whether or not this road
Carlos, can
has
you
been created
read
as a
section
private way.
On the third page, I believe it is, where the surveyor has to put a note on the property. I think it's the third page.
I'll just read the whole thing, it's short. No registered deed shall record any plan showing a division of tract of land into two or more lots and ways, whether existing or proposed, providing access thereto in a city or town in which the subdivision control law is in force, unless one such plan bears an endorsement of the planning board of such city or town that such plan has been approved by such planning board, and a certificate of the clerk of such city or town is endorsed on the plan, or is separately recorded and referred to on said plan, that no notice of appeal was received during the 20 days next after receipt and recording of notice from the planning board of approval of the plan. If an appeal was taken, that a final decree has been entered by the court sustaining the approval of the plan. Or 2, such plan bears an endorsement of the planning board that approval of such plan is not required as provided in section 81P. So that's the A&R plan. Or 3, the plan is accompanied by a certificate of the clerk of such city or town that it is a plan which has been approved by reason of failure of the planning board to act thereon within the time prescribed as provided in sections 81U and 81V, or that it is a plan submitted pursuant to section 81P, and that's been determined by failure of the planning board to act thereon within the prescribed time, that approval is now required in a reference to the book and page where such certificate is recorded is made on such plan, and unless in case of plans approved, the endorsement or certificate is dated within 6 months of the date of recording, or there is also endorsed thereon or recorded therewith and referred to thereon a certificate of the planning board or city or town clerk dated within 30 days of the recording that the approval has not been modified, amended, rescinded, nor the plan changed. Such certificate shall, upon application, be made by the board by the clerk, unless the records of the board or clerk receiving an application show that there has been such modification, amendment, rescission, or change. The planning board of a city or town which has authorized any person other than a majority of the board to endorse on a plan the approval of the board or to make any other certificate under the subdivision control law shall transmit a written statement to the register of deeds and the recorder of land court signed by a majority of the board giving the name of the person so authorized. The contents of any such endorsement of the planning board or certificate by the clerk of the city or town shall be final and conclusive on all parties subject to the provisions of section 81W. Such register and recorder shall keep in a place open for public inspection a book which shall be public record in which the name of each city or town in which according to notices sent by him by the board having powers of subdivision control in such city or town the subdivision control law is or may be in effect shall be separately indexed and in which shall be entered all notices from such board or the Board of Appeals of such city or town relating to subdivision control, including copies of the rules and regulations of such boards. Such register and recorder may each accept or record any plan of land for record any plan of land otherwise appropriate for record in a city or town of which the board having powers of subdivision control has not sent him notice that the subdivision control law is in effect in such city or town without requiring the approval of the planning board of such city or town or a certificate that no approval is necessary. Notwithstanding the foregoing provisions of this section, the Register of Deeds shall accept for recording and the land court shall accept with a petition for registration or confirmation of title any plan bearing a certificate by a registered land surveyor that the property lines shown are the lines dividing existing ownerships and that the lines of streets and ways shown are those of public or private streets or ways already established, and that no new lines for division of existing ownership or for new ways are shown. The recording of any such plan shall not relieve any owner from compliance with the provisions of the subdivision control law or of any other applicable provision of law. No register of deeds or recorder of the land court shall accept for record a notice of modification, amendment, or rescission of approval of a plan of a subdivision unless such notice contains a statement by the planning board that such modification, amendment, or rescission does not affect any lot or rights appurtenant thereto in such subdivision which lot was conveyed or mortgaged in good faith and for valuable consideration subsequent to the approval of subdivision plan. So it's a lot of words. Gordon, I imagine the portion that you're referring to is that second to last paragraph where it talks to the Register of Deeds not accepting a plan unless it's been certified by a land surveyor that the lines are dividing ownership and that the lines of streets are those of public or private streets or ways already established, and that no new lines for ownership of new ways are shown. Right, so the distinguishment on the 81X plan, right, is you're not supposed to show a new way or
So
a new
this
road.
way
For
doesn't exist.
registration. I believe it says for registration.
Do we have a certified engineer on
I'm
this?
sure Mr. Webby's office would be the office preparing the plan.
You're a certified engineer.
I am a registered land surveyor. I have a certified engineer, professional engineer that works with us, yes.
So I guess the question, I don't know if you have to answer it now, do you know the mechanism by which you would be creating these lots?
To create the lots with the site plan approval.
You can't do that.
How would that work then?
We're not seeking subdivision approval of the lots. Because your bylaw does not require subdivision approval of your lots for purposes of a multifamily development.
I don't disagree that in order to create these lots, you have to go through subdivision control. I think you can create the lots a number of different ways, right? The 81X process is one of those processes. I don't know that us approving this plan creates lots. Is that, I guess you're...
That's the inherent problem with your bylaw.
Okay. We have somebody from the zoning board?
Well,
private
it's at
citizen?
175 Elegant Road. I just want to make sure, I always come back to this problem that a subdivision is a subdivision is a subdivision, and a multifamily development is a multifamily development. And we have an ill-conceived, poorly written bylaw that goes against all conventions. Since this came up, I've asked land surveyors, I've asked realtors, I've asked everybody, do you know of one apartment complex, and I'm sure they're out there somewhere, there's a unicorn somewhere, but is there an apartment complex or is there a condominium complex where every building is on its own deeded lot?
Halifax Trails.
And they're all on their own deeded lot.
Not true. You waived the requirement.
Every building is on its own deeded lot. Well,
Is that our
so let me see.
bylaw? Or is
Just let him finish.
So that's what's being called the requirement. The planning board erred way back in the day because our multifamily developments defines multifamily development as a minimum of a 10-acre lot.
With each building on their own separate lot.
Well, that's after.
Parcel.
Well,
Parcel.
okay, but, so, if I may. So, I think what's not being given here is we had a new bylaw that was being applied by people, and the bylaw was going against convention. So I can understand why maybe some people thought, because the first definition you come to is a minimum of one lot. All you can really do now, so if you have a 19-acre lot in town, how our bylaw is written right now, all you can do, you can't subdivide it, because you have a minimum of a 10-acre lot. So all you can do is put up one building, and I argued this, you can go back and look at the tapes. In 2018, at the town meeting, when we tried to get rid of that, one building per lot. So 19 acres, you can have one building with 19 units in it. That's all you can do as a planning board. So the planning board, yes, it has to meet the requirements, but that's what our bylaw says right now. So I'm not finished, please. So that thing you just read, something X, whatever it was,
Yep.
that has to do with property and the developments that are under subdivision control. Correct?
I don't know that it does. I think it's a
Isn't that
different
what it said at
process
the
for
beginning?
creating
Chapter
lots.
41, subdivision.
It's under subdivision control, but it's not the same method as you would create lots with the public way, is it?
So, can we ask town council, are condominium units subject under Massachusetts general laws, are condominium units subject to subdivision control?
I think we know the answer to that, but I'm happy to forward the question to Attorney Questle. It's a general question and not really specific to our particular
So,
bylaws.
I'm not saying that I know what this says, but I would like to have town council look at this, if they may, because I'm no lawyer. But because this annoying question about the difference between, I'll read it. Don't get old like me and go blind. Chapter 183A condominiums, subdivision control law. The subdivision control law shall not apply to division of a building into units. So does that have anything to do with what we're talking about here? Because it's talking about the units of a condominium.
I don't think
Would you
it-
like to look at that? What does this have to do with?
It doesn't. It doesn't really have.
What is this, what in relation to subdivision control does this relate to?
There is no relation, because under condominium, under 183A, you're allowed to have one property, the underlying property is owned by the condominium association, whereas each individual unit could be owned by an individual person or trust or entity.
But what does it say that subdivision control shall not apply?
Meaning, if you wanted to put up two buildings, two separate buildings, each with 3 units, each with 3 condominium units, you don't have to separate those into different lots because the underlying lot is owned by the condominium association.
So is the town requiring that condominiums, as our bylaws read, be subject to subdivision bylaws?
The town, in my opinion, the town has no provision for condominiums, however, the town has a definition of condominiums. So in that case, we'd have to look at the difference between 183A, which is the state statute, and the bylaw, which is silent on condominiums. So most likely the statute would prevail because there's nothing in the bylaw controlling condominiums.
So is it reasonable to say that if the decision back in 2014-15 that was made to allow this development to go through, and it was made in good faith, can the town now go back and remove that, take that away from someone?
I hope not.
So the decision of the planning board was not appealed. They're seeking a modification. The planning board has the discretion to allow the modification or not. The decision of the zoning board was appealed, well, however, it was actually, the building permit was appealed. The issuance of the building permit was appealed. That was brought to the zoning board upheld the building commissioner, and then that was then appealed to land court. So what was before the planning board, the site plan approval, was never appealed.
So all that's before this board right now are the modifications.
Correct.
They can't, if they want to or not. We can talk about driveways, we can talk about loops, that's been approved. We can't go back now, they can't right now. What they're deciding right now is just on the change.
Modification, whatever the modification
That's it. As long, because that's getting
request is
confusing.
what-
It's a very simple
That's
question.
what's-
No, I tried to get that a point, that we're only dealing with the modifications and the impacts of them. I am firmly.
That even if they wanted to, they couldn't go back right now. All that's in front of them is the modifications.
They have to determine in their discretion to approve or deny the modification request.
And the modification is just the lot lines as we have shown now, which is reducing it from 6 lots to 4 lots. And
They're not lots.
as they're shown on the plans, it's 6 lots, whether or not they were defined as legal lots or not, and clustering the buildings. Those are the 2 changes.
Do we have clustering allowed in our bylaws?
We have the provision that says each individual building needs to be on its own lot, which is the reason for clustering the buildings and grouping them in the way that they have.
I believe that we just had a bylaw meeting with Attorney Queswell, sorry, did I say it right?
No, you did.
Queswell. That's right, Queswell. Talking about the fact that we would have to bring that to town meeting.
If we wanted to change it.
Yes.
Currently what it says is each individual building needs to be on its own lot.
And Mr. Borsani actually brought up a very good point that, that's how you say your last name, right? Borsani?
No, but it's close enough. Dan.
That town meeting actually did deny the change of the bylaw that needed to have multifamilies on 150 feet of frontage with individual lots.
We just straight up denied every single zoning change.
No, this was a year and a half ago, the town denied that change.
2018.
Okay.
Can we please close the public hearing? I have no problem with the board deliberating for as long as it wants. It'd be nice to have some order here so we know that we're at the end of the public hearing process and then you can deliberate.
Is there any final comment from anybody that's here? Mr. Andrews.
I would bring up the fact that when the zoning board looked at the country club development, it was the opinion of the zoning board that a definitive subdivision plan must be approved by the planning board in order to create the frontage for the individual lots and to create the lots themselves. So you still have to go through subdivision control to create these lots and to create the private way. This plan is illusionary. It doesn't exist.
So, anybody else? Before we close, I'd like to ask Attorney Questle the question of the creation of lots purely by approval of this plan, as the applicant's attorney has indicated that our approval of this plan may in fact create said lots that are presented on the plan, and they wouldn't necessarily need to go through any other formal process to create them.
So they would, if you approve this plan, you are approving site plan. There's a site plan approval. It then has to, he has to get a building permit. So it still has to go before the building commissioner as to whether these lots are buildable. Under 81X, it says that the number 1, under 81X, there was a number 1 provision, and it said that it has to be a plan endorsed by the planning board. A site plan approval is a plan endorsed by the planning board. 81X does not, in that number 1, it does not require that the plan be endorsed under subdivision control law, which is what 81P requires, approval not required under subdivision control law, and what definitive subdivision plans and preliminary subdivision plans, what all of those require. We still will come back to the same question as to whether or not this is buildable, because you're then
creating lots.
Does it conform to 7D, where each building has to be on an individual lot? Definition of lot is simply just, it's a very standard definition of lot, which is lot line shown on a recorded plan. I mean, I guess, in my opinion, it's not gonna end here tonight. So you guys are gonna make your decision, and then you're going to have, there's further things that are gonna happen. It's not gonna be over tonight with your decision.
So,
Unfortunately.
when we have to do an A&R, that creates lots.
Correct. The A&R you have, there's not necessarily a different standard for A&R, but for an A&R, for example, you can have an A&R on a roadway, like say it's a very narrow road that was created prior to subdivision control. And in that instance, the planning board has the discretion to determine if it has adequate access, safety, and if it's passable. That's not something that you would ever consider if you're looking at a definitive subdivision plan. When you're looking at a definitive subdivision plan, you're looking at grades, you're looking at drainage, you're looking at the top coat, the binder coat, all those kind of things. So every time you have a proposal in front of you, it's a little bit different if it's an 81P or if it's a definitive subdivision plan.
But, so I'm asking you, does this plan, if we approve it, create lots?
It would create a lot, if this plan gets recorded, it would create lots under your definition of lot under the bylaw. Does it create a lot under a subdivision control? No.
What about under an A&R?
No, it's not under, this is not approval not required. This is not under the 81P process at all.
But it wouldn't be, so this is an A&R lot subdivided and it's not a subdivision, so how are we creating a lot?
Under site plan approval. If, again,
Can you tell me that in the bylaw where it says that we can approve that with the site plan approval?
so it would be under, it's under 28 where it says all of these things. It does not say it outright. It doesn't say that you can create lots under, this. All it has is, so for example, if you,
Can you read me the bylaw and tell me what you mean?
under 28, so under 28,
Do you want me to give it to you so you can read it and then tell me? Because I'm really confused and I want you to tell me
So
how you think.
I'm going to be
lots.
100% honest with you. I'm confused by your bylaw. Your bylaw is
No, I
very
don't want,
confusing when it
I
comes
want you to
to.
read it and tell me why you think we'd be creating lots.
I don't think that's a bylaw issue. I think
That's not a bylaw
mass
issue,
general
so
law
that's,
thing.
I guess I'm confused as to what you're asking.
Well, you're telling me that under section 28, we
So-
can create lots.
No, I'm sorry, I thought you meant you have the approval of site, you have the authority for under site plan approval to approve under site plan, under 28, you have to go through site plan if you're going to do commercial, industrial, and multifamily development is in there. So they have to come to you, so you would be approving the site plan for a multifamily development under 28. That is what your involvement is tonight. That's what they're here for. They got approval under 28, and they now are seeking a modification of that approval. So it's just the modification that's in front of you. There's much case law on that. When you come back for a modification, you can only consider the modification. So that's what they're here before tonight, is the modification.
Nothing else.
So the follow-up question that I have, Amy, if I could jump up there, is
Please.
if we do create lots then, does our creation of those lots then imply any sort of frontage that the zoning board would then rely on, or the building inspector would rely on to demonstrate that the lots are in fact buildable? Or are those two separate issues?
They're two separate issues. So, again, like I said, it's not gonna end here. I don't, when these lots, whether these lots are created or not, whether they're recorded or not, it still doesn't mean that those lots would be buildable.
Alright, I think it's, well, we have one more person, and then probably time to wrap it up.
One last time, Mr. Andrews.
So if the site plan created the lots, as you're suggesting, then the other lots would have been created by site plan.
Because that plan was recorded, the
Because the plan was
2014
recorded.
plan showing lots but it didn't create the lots, because you can't create lots.
I'm sorry, I thought you presented this and said that this was the only recorded plan. Didn't you present that to us?
That's the only recorded plan.
So then
And the
what's
plan,
You just said.
no, site plan is different. The site plan doesn't create lots. That's the only recorded plan. If you look at that number, this is what he's calling out up here. Plan reference, plan book. Plan book 45, page 297. That's what that plan is.
That's the overall 10-acre lot.
Correct, and that's different from a site plan approval, which
Correct.
does not create lots.
Okay.
Can I just ask one quick? How many are voting on this for tonight? And
Three of us.
The three, and what do you need for approval? 2 out of 3 majority, or
I believe
does it have
that's
to be
it.
unanimous? Or?
I think it's a majority.
Yeah.
I'm
I
sorry.
think it's 2 out of 3.
Okay, thank you.
right, do we have a motion to close the public hearing?
Make a motion to close the public hearing and re-enter the regular scheduled planning board meeting.
Well, I don't think we would do that. We would close the public hearing, then we could deliberate, and then we would have to take action after that before we return to the original hearing.
Okay, I make a motion to just close the public hearing. And
The public comment part of the hearing, I guess.
public comment part of the hearing.
Like a second?
A second.
All right. Is there any other deliberation that we have here internally? I know my question is whether or not Amanda's Way, as it's currently built and exists out there, could meet the definition of a private way, whether or not subject to subdivision control or otherwise. It's a road, it exists. It could meet a general definition of a private way in my mind. The other issues as it relates to the setbacks from the sidelines from Amanda's Way to the adjacent residential properties, I think that's something outside of our purview. The water looping, the septic issue, some of the other additional components as it relates to any sort of special permits that they would need to get for the Aquifer Protection District. I think that's all outside the purview of what we have here in front of us today. So I think the things you have to look at is whether or not the buildings as presented today are substantially different, or if they could be approved, and whether or not the lots as configured would meet the requirements that would meet our zoning bylaw. So with those two things, I don't know that the buildings and the configuration of that really impacts much in the circulation for the access through the site there. And it's just really that private way issue and whether or not these lots comply with the intent of the zoning bylaw here. Or if anybody else has any thoughts to share there.
Yeah, I think the modification and the addition of the lot lines, which is kind of goes with something that they were actually asked from the planning board before. I don't see the impact on that. I just don't see a large impact or change in the reconfiguration of the other buildings. I'm comfortable with what it shows.
And the other part is that I don't understand how a private way would even get created through the subdivision control, even if it were referred to in the original approval. You know, I don't understand.
Because it doesn't make sense,
that
right? Because
process.
that goes through subdivision control, the multifamily doesn't. We certainly have issues within our own language.
But the problem is it's not allowed even, so how could you condition somebody to do something that's not allowed? So that's,
And we
That's
also
something that I
don't
don't
have, we don't have restrictions on any of these things, we just have conflicting language.
My thought process is that if each individual building needs to be on an individual lot, that they would need to subdivide.
but again,
Yeah.
we've heard that you can create paper lots, as it were, through a few different avenues, whether it's our site plan review, it's an 81X plan, it's A&R plans, it's traditional subdivision control for creating a subdivision roadway with all the frontage that you would need.
And by our definition, the second that if they record that plan, that meets our definition of a lot, as soon as that plan's recorded.
How?
But I don't know that it
Because,
does. right?
yes, certainly, because the definition of our lot would be a single area of land defined by meets and bounds or boundary lines in a recorded deed or a recorded plan. So the second there's pieces there that are defined and it's recorded, it's a lot.
Well, then how come when it was recorded in 2014, it didn't create the street or the lots?
But it wasn't.
No, but it was.
The plan showing the lot lines, my understanding is a plan showing the lot lines was not recorded.
No, it was.
Or even if it was, the plan that was presented to the building inspector differed from the plan that was approved through the site plan review, which was the problem. The building inspector issued building permits for a plan that did not show lot lines.
which was appealed, I believe.
The building permit was, yes, because he
So-
approved a plan that did not show lot lines.
This goes back to my question that I was talking about zoning. If this street was actually, if these lots were subdivided by the site plan review with the street, why would we be going through this now? If that was recorded in 2014 and created the lots and created the street, how would now us, how would now us doing that create it if it didn't do it then?
Because the plans that were presented for building permit differed from the plan that was approved. It presented two different plans that didn't align. That was the problem. They could have presented a plan, this plan, and who's to say how that would have turned out if they presented that plan for the building permit?
So, because everybody has stated that they need to create their own lots, zoning, I believe the judge. So if these were already created, why would they have gone in front of us on September 5th, in front of zoning on November 4th of this year, 2019, to ask for no lots if they already had this road based on the fact that these lots were created because the site plan was recorded? So how is it different now?
Because it was not recorded.
This is recorded, but it,
I thought that they just told us this is the only plan that's on record, that this is the only plan that's recorded.
they're not subdividing lots by recording this. This is just a plan that would be approved if they went through subdivision control. Otherwise, we would already have lots and we wouldn't be here right now.
The problem is that plan couldn't be approved through subdivision control. Because we
Because
don't
it's
allow
a
private
multifamily.
ways, and it wouldn't meet the definition.
No, way
requirements
different, because
for-
it's proposed as a
for public.
multifamily development.
Well, I think there's two issues, right? It's proposed as a multifamily development.
So subdivision control would never come into play.
How so? We have to create lots. It says each building to
That's
be on
because
it.
yeah, but that's
lot.
part of the problem in the language.
No. So our
Yes,
bylaw
that is
says
part of
it,
the
though.
problem.
Our bylaw states it, so whether or
Yeah.
not you disagree with it doesn't matter. Our bylaw
No,
states that each building
also says that it
needs
has
to be on a separate lot. So it doesn't matter what we want it to say.
Oh, no, yeah, no, I get you.
It states it.
No, but the other problem is that we say that the multifamily has to be one lot that's 10 acres or greater.
With each building located on a separate lot.
Yeah, so like it's not reasonable for anyone to assume that they only wanted 10-acre parcels with 10-unit buildings.
Except
like
for
that's
the-
not reasonable to assume.
But it says that every building has to be on a separate lot. It's not like that's left out. If that was left out, I would agree with you.
But it also,
But it's not left
it
out.
also doesn't say that you have to subdivide the land in order to create the lots. It
How-
just says the buildings need to be on their own lots.
But we always talk about that the only way to create lots is an A&R.
I've never said that.
Or
We
subdivision
have not
control.
discussed that.
For
You may
single-family
have heard that from
houses.
someone else.
Subdivision control is not just for single-family houses.
It's for creating buildable lots, typically for the intent of creating new rights of way for access so you can have the frontage to create new buildable lots for developments.
But the town upheld that we need to have 150 feet of frontage for a multifamily in a specific vote in May of 2018.
I don't know that they did.
It was part, I wish I brought it with me, but there was part of town meeting.
That it's required that multifamily
They tried to
developments-
change-
It's not in the zoning ordinance.
They
Yeah,
tried
so
to
that-
change the law. Yes, because then we'll get back to which zone are we building this in?
But it did
Yeah,
not
but-
get approved, right? So there is no requirement to have.
No, they wanted to change it, and it did not get the 2/3 vote to change it.
Right, so we're talking about the zoning in front of us, right?
Yes, so then I'll refer to the zoning chart and ask each member of the board to say, well, which zone are we building it in?
If we're in the agricultural residential zone, I think we all know that.
So when we look at the chart, what does it say?
The chart has specific density requirements for traditional developments in that particular zone. If you'd like to go through them, you could go through them.
Yeah, it says that each zone needs 150 feet of frontage with 40,000 square feet.
each lot you're talking about, right? Correct, for a single family house. And then there's some footnotes for other developments in that same table.
It doesn't specify use, it only specifies zone.
It does. Grab the table. Where is it?
It's 167.13. These are the uses, right? And then it says AR, B, I2, and it tells you what you need to do in each zone.
Yep.
Okay? So two-family or duplex zone, if it's in A and R, you need a special permit. It's in business, then you need a special permit. It's not allowed in industrial, it's not allowed in I2, and it would be a special permit in conservancy. So those right here are the zones. That's when we go to the chart. And the chart, do you have it right in front of you?
It's the very last page, 75, 167, 75.
Thank you. So because the uses all say where they go in the zones, so like which zone is it? Well, if it's in conservancy, it needs 40,000 square feet.
Well, let's talk about the one that we're in. Right?
Okay, but I'm just gonna state here for anybody who's watching at home, your minimum lot in any of our zones is 40,000 square feet. Your frontage is 150. The depth is 200. The front, meaning where you can build your property, is 50 feet from the street. Your side is 30 feet from the street, side, so if you had a neighbor. And your rear, you have to be 40 from the back. So then you say the schedule of density regulations as it applies to construction of a new dwelling house in a residential zone shall apply to a new dwelling house built in any zone other than residential, but in no case shall a multifamily dwelling be constructed on any lot having any area less than 40,000 square feet. No new dwelling or attached addition thereto or attached addition to an existing dwelling shall be closer than 30 feet from either sideline. So basically, if we go to the uses, it doesn't differentiate what zone it's in. So if we're looking at an agricultural residential district, right?
Yep.
We need 40,000 square feet.
Yep.
We need 150 feet of frontage.
Yep.
And the rest of the regulations. So it's not whether or not multifamily is a use.
Take a look at footnotes 1, 2, and 3. There's specific setbacks for the multifamily developments.
Yes, but it doesn't differ from frontage and it doesn't differ from minimum lot.
I don't disagree with you that the overall development parcel prior to the lotification, if you want to call it that, would need to meet those other requirements. The 40,000 square feet, the frontage, the depth, all the rest of the building heights, and the percentage of lot coverage and all that. If not otherwise expressly identified in section 167.12, because there's more and different specific dimensional requirements in that section that would supersede what's in the table.
Except for the fact that each building has to be put on its own individual lot.
Right, and there's different setbacks, right? The 75 feet for the minimum front setback, minimum rear is 100, and there has to be at least 100 feet between any two buildings, and you have to have that 30-foot buffer zone around the overall project. There's floor area requirements for how
Yes.
big they need to be. There's all these other different dimensional requirements that apply specifically to these kinds of developments.
Correct, but it's still which zone is it being put in and what the overall town requires for any building lot on any building.
I don't think we disagree about that, but I guess how does that factor into?
Because I'm wondering how this is actually, if it's not being subdivided, then we're not creating lots. And then it doesn't go by the multifamily bylaw anyways.
I think it meets the intent of the bylaw in that the overall piece of land, because if we follow that strict interpretation, then none of these lots would qualify for a multifamily development, because you've created a bunch of lots that are smaller than 10 acres. And that on its own doesn't align with the regulations as they're written.
So how do you feel that this lot never had 150 feet of frontage to begin with? It had over 10 acres, but it didn't have 150 feet of frontage. So then if you think that because it needs over 10 acres, then why do we deny that it needs 150 feet of frontage to start with?
I think unfortunately that's one of those things that's outside our purview, and that aspect of the project hasn't changed. The part that's changed is the internal lot configuration and the clustering of the buildings.
But I get back to it only due to the fact that how are we actually subdividing the lots? And if they're not subdividing the lots, then they're not putting them on individual lots, which is part of the bylaw.
But to the point of what we talked about before, throughout the process of the site plan review, we create lots through purely in the definition of the zoning as it's written, what Mark read earlier. It's just basically a lot defined on a plan that has meets and bounds. It doesn't talk about whether or not that lot has the requisite frontage required to be called a buildable lot. I think that's the building inspector's purview to decide whether or not these paper lots, they could even do this without any buildings shown on it, basically.
So when we do A&Rs, why are we even ever doing A&Rs if we're not supposed to do any of it?
Because a single family home has to comply with the overall
But when
regulations.
And the
we do
A&R.
an A&R, we're not
But the
actually
A&R is us.
talking use.
We're certifying that we
Yeah.
don't have any say on it. We're saying that you don't need approval not required. So when we're doing an A&R, we're saying that we're not approving it and that we don't have to. That's essentially what we're saying. We're not saying we looked at it and everything's great. We're saying you have everything you need and you don't need our okay.
Well, there's a checklist that we have to make sure that they have contiguous
To
upland.
make sure that they meet our approval not required.
So
To
why
qualify as a
wouldn't
buildable
we
lot.
be looking at any of that now? If they're not going to subdivide, but yet they need to have a multifamily on an individual lot with 150 feet of frontage and 40,000 square feet, then if they're not subdividing it, then how are we actually
Okay.
following the Halifax
So
bylaw?
the way I look at it is that we have our one piece that's over 10 acres, which allows them for the 10 units, right? So the lots that they need to show them on are what we're creating if we endorse this plan here.
So then I'm gonna get right back to the same thing. In 2014, when the site plan was recorded, why did it not create the lots in the street?
I do not know that the site plan was recorded.
It was.
I was told that this is the only plan that was recorded, and this is not the site plan.
That is,
I may have been informed incorrectly.
that's a different type of thing that you're looking at. A site plan is not something that subdivides.
No, but again, the site plan can create paper lots. We're not
So
creating
why aren't they
subdivision.
already created?
That's a question for the attorney that could have asked earlier if you wanted to.
I think I did.
And what was the answer?
I believe that they weren't created because it was there in front of us trying to do it now.
Sure, and it's essentially the same kind of plan, except now they've been to the zoning board and they have an indication of what the zoning board is going to require in order to meet their definition of what they're gonna need to see for the size of the lot, for the different configurations on the lot, for the frontage along this private way, if we wanna call it that.
Which hasn't been created.
None of this has been created. Right now, all we have is that lot right there. That's the only thing that exists today, other than the actual improvements that were constructed.
I think it's neither here nor there what was constructed already. I think it's basically what we're looking at is if they're not subdividing, zoning just said that they needed to. They said they needed lots.
Yeah, zoning didn't say they had to subdivide, they just
How
said
do you
they
create
needed to show
lots?
lots. Again,
Show
you
them on
go
a
through
plan.
this, there's a couple different avenues that you can take.
So the site plan in 2014, if it did not create the lots, then how is this site plan gonna create the lots now?
it creates lots when you record the plan and you go through the process with the registry and you take that plan then to the building inspector, then he would correlate those lots to what is in front of him.
But the site plan is recorded.
So if they wanted to, they could take that site plan and try and get that site plan approved through the building department. I think the problem that you'll probably find on that one is that those lots don't meet the required frontage, probably got 150 feet for each individual lot. I haven't scrutinized that plan, but I imagine if you looked at it, you would probably find that to be the case. We can hypothesize about why they've done things a certain way or why they haven't done things a certain way, why one board is voting one way and one board is voting another way. In my mind, this isn't that different from the plan that was previously approved by the planning board.
That
it's
needed
showing
high
buildings
variances.
from the zoning board, should the zoning board decide the variances were required.
And that they're supposed to follow all the Halifax zoning bylaws.
I think there was a catch-all statement to that effect, that they had to follow the rules and the regulations as otherwise provided, right? So zoning board decided that the plan met their requirements, or if they decided to grant waivers or provide variances from certain requirements, that was the zoning board's purview. I think much like this one, whatever we choose to do with this, the zoning board will still have to take action on it some way or another. The building inspector is still gonna have to take action on it one way or the other.
It's pretty similar to what we do with most people though, where we're like, okay, we say it to everybody, good luck, and we hope that it gets them through to like the next board, you know?
Yes, but following the laws, we are elected by the Halifax residents to follow these laws, to protect them, because of the fact that these laws were put in the 80s to protect our schools from being overcrowded, because we sent elementary school kids to Pembroke and we had double sessions of high school.
Yeah, but I don't think the fact that you don't like kids in town has any impact on
I didn't
this
say
property.
that.
You don't like new kids in town.
No, I didn't say that.
You don't want new
It
kids
has to follow
in
the
town.
rules and regulations of our bylaws for reasons that we don't want a density so that we
As long as
have
they're not
to.
kids.
Huh?
But
But
you
it's
have, it
also to
seems like
do
you
with
have this.
water. No.
It seems like you have this difference with the density of like
No,
who
it's
they are.
making an example, so
Okay.
it has to
I
do with
understand.
water, it has to do with traffic, and we all have to obey all of these things, and that's why
But-
we're elected and take an oath.
But as a board member, I've already looked at the density on this, and this is no dense than any other project.
But there's other
that would be-
regulations besides density, there's subdivision.
I'm just saying you brought it up,
lots.
and I'm just saying if you think that we didn't look at that, or that wasn't, or that this doesn't meet that requirement, this meets the density requirement. This does. This doesn't circumvent that at all. Just,
But there's also another part of that. Each multifamily has to be on their own individual lot.
all right, so you kind of like countering my thing with this total other issue. And I feel like we're not really getting down to the bottom, you just keep jumping with another thing. So if we don't have any more questions, I feel like now we're just trying to prove our points to each other. Yeah, I don't know if any of us actually have any more questions for council or questions of how we feel on this project. Maybe we should think about that. Like, do we actually have any more questions?
Well, I do. I want to know
Okay.
how a site plan in 2014 didn't subdivide the lots and the road, and why they wouldn't have used that if it already did create it, instead of going for no lot lines.
But that's like you're asking me a question of like why they didn't do something.
No, but do you not see that? So why would
Okay,
they
all right.
use the
But
road?
what-
So
yeah,
now
so-
we're going to sit here and
What-
we're gonna say a site plan is now gonna do that, where I don't know why they already wouldn't have had that from the 2014 recording of a site plan. If recording of a site plan creates lots and roads, then.
No, hold on.
Oh, but I thought it did, because I thought that the road was created. and that site plan was created. So to see how there's like a twist in that, so if the road was actually created by the site plan in 2014, then those lots also would have been created. So my question is if we approve this now, how would this actually create the lots in the road if it wasn't already done by the site plan in 2014?
Because I don't know that the site plan in 2014 showed the lot lines.
Can we ask Amy if the site plan in 2014 was recorded?
I don't.
I don't know.
And I think the plan that we've seen does in fact show lot lines. I think it's.
You don't know that information when you're sitting here representing us right now? You don't know whether the site plan is
Why would-
actually recorded?
That's,
I don't know.
You should know that.
why should she?
So that we have full information, that's why we hire her
But these
to
are
be
our
here.
records. You can go through our records. I'm sure she'll let you. Like, why would she know? You can't really expect
I
her to
believe
know
that somebody's-
everything.
Well, if you're coming to represent a case.
But I think you're
you
really
should.
underestimating how
Right.
many times and how many hours that this board has sat on this project. We're talking probably hundreds of hours
Yeah, I know.
prior to you even being on this board.
I know, 'cause I've
There's no
been
way
at certain
anyone,
meetings
myself
back in the
included,
beginning
would
of
remember
this
all those things.
decade that
It's
they were here.
ridiculous to expect someone to know all that
I would
stuff.
also like to point out, I didn't represent the board, and I also don't represent the board.
I just want to
directly
know
or
whether or not
personally.
I think that we would need to know that information.
So
I
is
think it would
that,
be nice to know, but we have a limited bandwidth of availability. The town doesn't have a limited funds to be able to pay Attorney Questle to spend 40 hours a week for the next 3 weeks to make arguments on one half or the other half of the project. I think we could ask her questions about the zoning bylaw in general and this project as it relates to compliance with that zoning bylaw. And the history of it is, I think, something that would just take way too much time to get another attorney up to speed.
and it was certainly not expected of her.
I'll look it up.
So my only question to you is whether or not this road, path, or drive that's currently out there today, whether or not it matters that it's physically built or not, but a piece of pavement that provides access to buildings within a development, if that could meet the definition of a private way in a general sense or otherwise.
I mean, in a general sense, sure, because there's no definition of private way in the zoning bylaw. But again, we're dealing with a very tough bylaw because it's not answering any of our questions.
Is there anything specific you're looking up at this point?
Yeah, I'm looking up to see if the plan was recorded. I find it,
How does that factor into?
because if
what we
it was
decide here?
recorded, then it would have, by theory of what we're talking about right now, already created the road and the lots. But
So
it-
then this is just a change, I see what you're saying, so then this is really just a change in the lot lines and the road already exists.
But
I see what
then,
you're
why
saying.
would you have gone to zoning and had no frontage?
Because that was direction from the court proceedings that they got kicked back, that they had to find something different that made the building permit plans align with what was approved.
Why wouldn't they have used that road before?
I don't know.
Well, wouldn't it seem that if the road was created, they would have used it before?
When you
Why
say
would-
road, what do you mean, just the lots created?
Yeah, I mean, if 2014's plan was recorded, then it would have already created lots and a road. Whereas we're being advised now that if this new site plan is recorded, it creates lots and a street. So why wouldn't it have already done it in 2014?
And
So
again,
say
And
it
if-
did, this is still just
And
a
if it did,
modification.
why isn't it on the town plan or at the or recorded at the clerk's office? Those are questions that I have. So if it's not, then, and it's not, then how are we actually saying that it's created by a site plan? It's not.
Well,
I feel as if it
our
is.
council indicated that it would be created through the site
Yeah,
plan. A lot in the sense that it's not a lot that provides the requisite requirements for the dimensional aspects of being able to put new single-family homes on that road. I don't think it would meet that requirement because it
But
doesn't
again, that's a
provide that
use.
frontage.
But that's a use, and in every single zone in our town, it says that you need 150 feet of frontage, and it does not specify you don't need to subdivide. It states that each building needs to be on their own lot,
And each one of these buildings is on its own lot as presented on
only if
this
they're
plan.
subdivided.
Only if the lots are created. I don't think it has to go through the subdivision control process.
So the way I heard it tonight is that we need to go through 81X or P or whatever, and that depends on a town vote. And,
It does not.
yeah,
It does not.
to accept the street.
But they're not creating a public way.
And, or subdivision control. But if we can't, give an
81X would just be
A&R.
creating lots, not a public road.
And they don't need that for us either.
And it would
it
not
doesn't
be on
make
the,
any sense, something's a little off. Like, what, if there was already a site plan recorded, then this would already have been done. So,
Because this is a modification.
you wouldn't go to zoning and ask for there not to be any frontage and to waive all the lots if you already had a road. You wouldn't.
But it's
I
not
mean,
a-
like,
it's not a
common sense would
public
tell you
road.
that. We don't have a definition for internal driveway. We don't have a definition for a private way. That doesn't mean that we allow them.
but inherently as part of any site plan that we approve, there are access roads, there are paths that are shown within these
As the beginning
developments.
and pathway to go to subdivision control.
No, within any sort of development, you're gonna have in Walmart, those aren't public ways that go through the parking lot of
That's an
Walmart and Stop
industrial
and Shop.
thing.
I don't think it matters. Again, to your point, the use shouldn't really matter. It's what
They
it
do
is
have
as
the
a
frontage
development.
on the street to get there.
And again, that's an issue that I agree with you on, and I don't know that this project necessarily has the required 150 frontage that I believe would be required to allow a multifamily development from the start, but that's not part of the modification that's in front of us today. The modification is just the reconfiguration of the lot lines interior to the overall parcel and the clustering of the buildings.
The motion that I would make then is to vote that they have subdivision control.
I don't think that we can vote to change their proposal. I don't think
I
we
would
can
say
do
that
You can make a
That-
motion to that effect if you
if-
like, if somebody would like to second
I would
that.
only accept this if they had to go through all aspects of subdivision control.
Is that a motion you would like to make?
Yes. I motion to vote that we have agree to it as long as they go through subdivision control, 167-7D2, follow all Halifax zoning bylaws, and be sure to go through Zone 2 qualifications. And that would mean meeting all of the Halifax bylaws, not just to say it, but to absolutely mean it. And subdivision control would absolutely have to be part of that for me to say anything about it forward.
Okay, do we have a second on that? Okay, not here in a second. The motion doesn't carry. So would anybody else like to make any other motions?
Make a motion to approve the modification to Knitter Estates.
Plan as presented. I don't see any info on it, but
Prepared by,
prepared by Webby Engineering, dated
I'm gonna go November 7th.
11/7.
Thank you.
plan dated 7/10/19.
Would there be any special conditions that you would want to introduce or reference in the motion?
No, I'd just like to approve the modification as proposed.
I would offer to add a condition to that, make that subject to adhering to the remainder of the zoning requirements and proceeding through the proper process for compliance with the Aquifer Protection District requirements.
All right, I'll make, change the motion, make the motion to approve the modification to Amanda's Estates, plan drawn by Webby Engineering, dated 7/10/19, with the condition that they meet the aquifer protection requirements.
I think that was it, but it should also be subject to review and approval by the various town boards.
Subject to review and approval from the other various town boards.
I would have to add subdividing in there because it states that each building be on a separate lot.
Would you like to add that to your motion?
No, I do not.
Do we have a second? I will second that motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
No.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I think that it needs a unanimous vote.
Can we get confirmation from Ms. Plessel? So what is the vote requirement for approval of that?
Plan is majority.
So 2 of 3 makes the requirement?
After a zoning board has denied it,
The zoning board denied something else.
but it came, no, because they're not subdividing.
So
This has not been denied by the zoning.
it's different. It's a different request. It's in front of the-
So I think your question
They're
is
not
whether or not,
subdividing. And after a denial of the zoning board, when they come back for a planning board, it only goes back to the zoning, a full unanimous vote of the planning board.
So
we make a
you're
motion to
you're
close?
talking about 14A, section 16, which isn't in front of you right now.
But that's how the vote is that if you are the zoning.
Amy, before we continue, please make a motion to close the public hearing for Amanda's Estates.
Okay, I'll make a motion to close the public hearing for Amanda Estates and return to the regular scheduled planning board meeting.
I will second that. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Make a motion to close the close the planning board hearing.
So we did present the Mylar plan for endorsement of it. I wanted to make sure that you saw that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Make a motion to close the planning board hearing.
Make a motion to close the planning board hearing.
Second that. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.